Well, hello everybody, my name's Chris and today I'm taking a close look at the new Sigma 35mm f1.4 HSM lens. Isn't it handsome to look at? Sigma's new branding seems to be a hit. Now, Sigma have a history of making fast, wide-angle lenses, but they've never produced anything as ambitious as a full-frame 35mm f1.4 lens. As such, it's competing with the highly regarded Canon 35mm f1.4L lens. But the Sigma is only about half the price of the older Canon lens, so let's see how good it really is. 35mm is a classic focal length on a full-frame camera. It's nicely wide angle for general photography, but long enough to give your subject some kind of emphasis, so 35mm is great for street photography or shooting at weddings and parties. This footage shows 35mm on a full-frame camera, but here's 35mm on an APS-C camera, which is the majority of digital SLR cameras that cost under £1,000. As you can see, it's much tighter, the equivalent of 56mm on Canon anyway, so it acts as a standard lens on APS-C cameras. This is also a very nice focal length, giving you even more emphasis on your subject. However, you can see that the video footage gets a little more shaky. Remember, this lens is not image stabilized. The maximum aperture of f1.4 is what you're really paying for with this lens. f1.4 lets in a lot of light. This is good for action photography or taking pictures indoors, as you can get faster shutter speeds. It's also very good for video work indoors or at night. And the fast f1.4 aperture means that you can get a really blurry background, a very narrow depth of field, even with fairly wide angle shots. For me, this is probably the most exciting thing, as it means you can get some really beautiful pictures. Even everyday items around your house, such as these curtains, can be made into beautiful images with an f1.4 lens. I'm going to test this lens on a full-frame Canon 6D camera, but I'll also include APS-C test results at the end, as most people shoot on APS-C cameras. Firstly, let's look at the build quality. As you can see, the lens is finished in Sigma's rather classy new style, and the build quality is pretty luxurious. The barrel is smooth, heavy and made of metal, so you know it's going to take a few knocks. The focus ring is large and rubberized, and it's extremely smooth and well damped. It turns 90 degrees, which is long enough for precise focusing, but short enough for pulling focus when you're shooting video. The lens has full-time manual focusing, so you can turn a focus ring at any time, and the front element stays still as you focus, so that's very good news for people who use certain filters. The autofocus motor is silent and very fast. It's normally a bit faster than this when it has something clear to focus on. The autofocus was also very accurate when I tested it on my Canon 6D and my 60D. So all in all, the lens is built perfectly well, easily the equal of any Canon L lens, and it's a joy to handle. Let's look at the picture quality. These are the results on my full frame camera, so they only count for Canon's expensive 1D, 5D and 6D series cameras. I'll show you the APS-C results from my Canon 60D in a moment. First up, let's open the aperture to f1.4. After all, most people will be buying this lens to shoot at f1.4. The lens is very sharp indeed in the middle of the image with no visible purple fringing. There's plenty of contrast, giving a nice clear image. In the corners, we also see decent sharpness with no visible chromatic aberration or colour fringing. What a performance! This is an astounding result for a wide-angle, wide-aperture lens. I've never handled an f1.4 lens as sharp as this. As we stop down to f2, the corners become even sharper and much brighter, and the middle of the picture becomes extremely sharp. At f4, the middle is still perfect, and the corners of the image also become pin-sharp and perfectly bright. Even down to f11, the image quality is fantastically good. So, on full-frame cameras, we can see that this is Sigma's masterpiece lens. I never imagined a lens could perform so well at f1.4. The only full-frame issue I can see is that, as you might have spotted earlier, the lens suffers from some major vignetting or dark corners. This is normal for a fast, wide-angle lens, but the dark corners you'll get on full frame really are strong. I mean, here's a picture at f2.8, and the same picture with the aperture wide open at f1.4. Those are some seriously murky corners, goodness knows what could be hiding there. Technically, it is a major weakness of the lens, but in a way, it can actually make your pictures look quite artistic, so every cloud and what have you. This is only a major problem if you're using a full frame camera anyway, so most of us won't have to worry. Let's look at the image quality on an APS-C camera, in this case my 18 megapixel Canon 6DD. With the aperture wide open at f1.4, firstly you'll notice that there's much less vignetting in the corners, thank goodness. In the middle of the image, the picture quality is extremely sharp and clear, with just a minuscule hint of purple fringing, which you might be able to spot on the edges of the window frames. When we look in the corners, we see a tiny bit less sharpness, but it's still an astonishing performance for f1.4. This lens is very sharp indeed. At f2, there's a tiny increase in sharpness in the corners, and at f2.8, the whole image quality is basically flawless. I can tell you now, I got my Canon 6DD about a month after it came out, over 3 years ago now, and I've used it to test a huge amount of equipment. I can safely say that it has never had such a sharp lens attached to it. Certainly at f1.4, this is a new level of picture quality. So we can safely say it's rather sharp. Let's look at the distortion characteristic. On a full frame camera, there's a hint of barrel distortion, but it's pretty much negligible. That's rather low for this kind of lens, so it's a good performance. On an APS-C camera, again, a very small amount of barrel distortion is detectable, but nothing you'd notice in everyday photography. While this is obviously not a macro lens, it is capable of focusing very close to your subject, which is a great bonus. Even at f1.4, the close-up image quality is surprisingly sharp, getting even better at f2.8. This is a very good performance, making the lens even more versatile. On a related note, it also does quite well in terms of longitudinal chromatic aberration, which is colour fringing in front of and behind the point of focus. If you look closely at this picture, you can spot a little purple fringing in front of the point of focus and a little green fringing behind. If you stop the lens down to f2.8, it largely goes away. But again, even at f1.4, this is a comparatively good performance for a fast lens, so I'm pretty impressed. As you can see in this footage, the lens also performs very well against bright lights. And finally, the quality of the bokeh or background blur is also very nice with this lens. Those out of focus backgrounds around your subject are rendered very smoothly with no harsh edges or weird highlighting. This is exactly what you need for this kind of lens, and again, compared to other fast wide-angle lenses, this is a very good performance. So I'd better wrap up this review now, because if I go on much longer, I'll start sounding like some kind of crazy Sigma fanboy. But considering this amazing lens only costs around £500, I think Canon and Nikon should take a long, hard look at what Sigma are doing and then look at their own very expensive offerings in the market, which don't seem to be much better, or any better at all. The images that any 35mm f1.4 lens can produce are simply gorgeous, but the Sigma gets them in the ultimate of style with, technically, extremely high picture quality. It's such a simple lens, yet everything about it works just perfectly, and it's especially fun to use on a full-frame camera with its super blurry backgrounds. The only flaws I could possibly imagine are the lack of image stabilization and the strong vignetting, but those are completely normal characteristics for this type of lens. If you want a really special lens, with a focal length and maximum aperture that you'll want to use all the time, and picture quality to make you smile, then just get the Sigma 35mm f1.4 HSM right now. Very highly recommended.